Hello, welcome to the Elevate Dataviz Show, number 13. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
We
So that was a bit loud, wasn't it? Hi.
we see you, Duncan.
That was so cute.
We
Wow,
are
great
here
start.
excitedly to explore current topics in data visualization, share our creative inspiration, and the tools and techniques that we're experimenting with as practicing information designers. Today, we are talking about dirty data. So, common problems that we encounter when we get a data set, how we deal with it, how we decide whether a data set's good to work with, all that kind of stuff. I'm Ali Torben. We also have Duncan Gear and Gabrielle Marit here with us today. Before we jump in, the show is supported by the members of the Elevate Dataviz learning community who get the opportunity to watch and ask questions live. So if you would like to do that and you want to level up your Dataviz skills in a supportive community, you can check out elevatedataviz.com. Okay, dirty data. So Duncan brought up a good point that we should probably talk about how we decide if a data set is, or where we go to find data first, and then how we decide our spidey sense for whether this is going to be a good data set to use or not. Duncan,
Before you
kick?
even look at it,
Yeah.
I think there's definitely, I don't know about you two, but I have definitely developed a kind of sixth sense for before I start downloading data, like, is this actually going to be useful for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about that because it can really save you some time developing this sense.
Yeah. I think one quick thing for me is if you jump to a site and it doesn't have any information about how the data was collected or like a data dictionary kind of a thing. Like what are the columns in there? What are the expected values? If there's none of that ever to be seen, sometimes you download it and it's a tab in the spreadsheet. So maybe you don't know that it's there before you download it. But that's one of those things where it's like, if they're not even going to tell me how it was collected or define the variables for me, I'm going to be having, my confidence level is going to be low, even if I do something with it. Like, I don't know what this, if I was making a lot of assumptions about what this variable means. So take it with a grain of salt. What about you, Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely one thing for me, one like really key clue is what file formats are available. It's like such a weird thing, but like if there's a CSV download, I know I'm generally in for a good time, or like a shapefile or something like that, something that is like definitely the kind of format that is going to be easy for me to pull into whatever software, right? If it's like,
so hold on. Do you think, is your hunch that that's the case because someone who knows how to create a CSV or a shapefile is someone whose technical expertise is maybe a little bit higher, and it's not someone who's just like typing some random stuff in a PDF and they're like, this is good?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say like PDF is the opposite end of that spectrum, If all they have to download is PDFs, then I'm like, ooh, this is going to need a lot of work.
Can I put a caveat to that though? Probably because we work with different data sets. So if you work with a large data set, I'm on Duncan and I'm like, yeah, get the big CSV. But if you work with research papers, you won't get access to CSV. It's always a PDF, usually in the annexes. So I just wanted to throw that out that it doesn't have to be an absolute no because it's a PDF.
Yeah, 100%. I guess what I'm trying to say here is like these are the things that give me signals about whether I am going to have to do a lot of work or whether I'm going to just be able to like import it and just like go, you know what I mean? And what I can expect in terms of, are they going to have properly thought about like, have they gone through and just like made sure there's no duplicates, or, is there going to be consistent spelling in a column or, something like that? I think the kind of halfway house, the sort of like neutral area is when they've got like Excel sheets to download. Like there are a lot of data providers that export their data in Excel. And I think the reason they do that is because there are quite a lot of people who might need to use that data who might not be familiar with CSVs, and they think, okay, an Excel sheet is going to be something that pretty much anyone can open. We want to make our data available to a lot of people. And yeah, I'm wholly supportive of like access to data in this way. I think that's very important. But also, it can also mean that whoever is sharing the data is just like, they don't know how to use CSVs. They know, all they know is how to use Excel. And so they're just sharing an Excel file because that's all they're able to do.
What about you, Gabby? Is there something that you are that's tickling your spidey sense?
It's a lot harder because I work with like quite varied data. Like I'm on Duncan's side when it comes to really large data set, like things I'm gonna have to automate. Like I'm designing with something that's gonna be like interactive or automated. But I work with a lot of very small data, like 2 percentages and type of thing. And sometimes like, you know, it's not in a PDF, it's not in S because it's not even worth being in there.
It's just written in
like,
some text.
It's like written in some text somewhere, which I wish it wasn't, but it is. Like, so I think I have that. I'm less concerned. Full transparency, I gotta say, most of the time I felt like, how do I clean up data? And I'm like, I work with such small data sets. It's a non-issue most of the time. Mainly, my main concern is methodology. I get worried when there's no information whatsoever about the definition, like the variable that Ali was talking about, as well as, you know, any methodology on how this was collected, how many people were involved, is this a survey, is this a like, I feel like there's so many times when I'm saying something and I'm like, what does that come from? Like somebody help me with to understand the context around the data.
Yeah, context around the data. I think that's a great way to put it, especially if you're working with survey data, right? I mean, how many people were in the survey? How did you get these people? A lot of times people just leave that stuff out. 60% of survey respondents said this. I'm like, there's so many.
The format of the survey, because they give me result and I'm like, was the question asked this way or did you interpret the result a different way? That's like one that I get all the time because I work for a lot of like just private corporation to like show survey data result. No, sometimes on fun stuff. And I'm like, what was the question? Like, did you ask people to order their preferences? Did you ask them to say yes or no on a scale? Because sometimes they provide me something and I'm like, what does that, like, I can't tell you exactly if you're right in even your interpretation of the data before even looking at how clean it is.
I think that's a really good point. Seeing if that person has listed sources on where they got other data, because there is, every time someone's doing something with data, they're interpreting it, right? So seeing if you can go back to the source of the data, you know, I try to go as far back as I can. Like if they said, oh, I, you know, started with this, you know, what is it? Like, I don't know, FBI crime statistics or something, and then added this go back to that one and see if you can actually pull that and see if what they did, any transformations they did, you agree with, and if they did them right. I mean, people make mistakes and then they also apply their own assumptions, and that could cause some problems for you if you start using it. Let's see. I actually don't go and just search around for data sets that much in my work. I'm usually given the data set
by a client or okay.
How much are you looking for data sets, Duncan?
Quite a lot. Yeah. Like I will be,
you're coming more from the journalist side, so I guess that makes sense. You're making the story.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. But, you know, even in my work so I work part-time for a climate charity called Possible. And, you know, and so a real life example of an assignment that I had last year was, you know, we want to do something about noise pollution in cities. And we wanted to compare London, Paris, and New York, right? And, you know, these are 3 huge international cities. You know, you'd think it would be fairly easy to get hold of good noise pollution data in these cities. And the only thing that was really available was models, like that had been, you know, sense checked in a few places on the ground. There were no actual good like comprehensive maps of noise pollution in the cities. And then another thing was all of them had completely different methodologies. But you know, this is an example of, we want to campaign on a subject, but we don't necessarily have any data. We need to go and look at what is being published by you know, by governments, by local governments and things like that. And so I absolutely find, you know, even in my client work, that I have to go and find data sometimes. Or another example might be, maybe a client has some data, but they want to cross-reference it with another data set to enrich that data set to make it more meaningful to people. Or I will say, oh, you know, this data you've got is cool. What if we compared it to this? And then I've got to go and find this. So I think those are definitely examples when I would go out and just sort of like start typing things into Google.
What about you, Gabby? Do you feel like you're searching the internet for data that much? I know you do it for personal projects. When
I
you do your
definitely
Instagram.
do it for personal. I do it for journalism pieces, and I do it for clients. I don't know what the percentage is because I am giving some data, but regularly people would come to me, and I'm talking large non-profit, i.e. the United Nations, like governmental stuff, and they're like, we have this data, but they actually don't have it. They mean in the organization, someone has the data set. And you're like, maybe it's there, and you have okay, giving a concrete example. I'm currently working on the SDG goal, like a campaign for the SDG with the United
What are
Nations.
SDGs? Sorry.
Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you.
So I'm working on a campaign for one of the department in the UN, and we are trying to visualize a lot of like the progress that has been made and the issue with everything. The SDG is like kind of like the targets. They have targets for like poverty rate that they want to achieve by 2030, for instance. So they and the UN is tracking like thousands of data. It's really impressive what they have put together and how much they're tracking across the globe. Like it's such a massive effort. However, when it comes to finding those data set, that's a whole nother story. So we're trying to visualize, every SDG picking like one data set that matches our story or that, we think is interesting for the public. And despite them having some kind of a data hub, it's so incomplete that I have to like go back and track the source of which department within the UN has that data set that is completed and in a, usable format. Like even the interactive report that they have online, do not have sources of which department has been charged on this. And so they'd be being like, poverty has decreased in the last 30 years by 22% with a graph, and there's no source of where does that data set on poverty comes from and where to find it to be able to double check. And so I regularly have to do that double work of like within a big organization, or just like Duncan, having to find outside sources to confirm the data. And I also like to look at it to also confirm what my client say, because I think this interpretation, I'm doubtful of any interpretation of data. So I like to have it, especially on climate, I like to have it confirmed by external source. So if you corporate, you come to me and you're like, we're reducing by this percent, like waste is a third of the carbon footprint of individuals, I'm like, I'm gonna double check what you're saying, because I do not want to participate into greenwashing, and I might find different data point than you.
Yeah, that's a good point. What about when you open up your data set, and what is the first thing that you do? For me, I like to add filters across the top, like turn all the column headers into a filter so that, like it has a little drop down so that I can start checking to see what kind of values are typically in this column.
What software are you usually using to?
I use Excel.
Excel. Okay.
Yep. What about you, Duncan?
I am Google Sheets for, I would say, about 90% of my data work.
Why do you choose that over Excel?
Because I don't have a Microsoft Office license.
All right.
Yeah.
That's fair.
and yeah, I don't know. Excel always feels like it's just slightly too much that I need. Like, I don't use all the crazy stuff in Excel. Sheets has got tons of, I don't think I've ever hit a situation where I have needed to do something in Sheets and I can't, but I know I could do it in Excel. So yeah, it's never been a problem. And yeah, Sheets is free. So
Fair.
I'm very happy to give Google my spreadsheet usage data in exchange for a free and honestly really great service. I think Google Sheets is fantastic. What was the question? What's the first thing that I do?
Yep, you open it up. What are you doing?
Yeah, so it's just kind of like make it look normal, and by normal I mean remove almost any formatting that is in the data by default. Put it in my whatever the Google Sheets default font is. Yeah, kind of like you, I fix the first column and I just like crop out any rows and columns that aren't being used so that I just have one rectangle. And then I go and look and I'm kind of like, okay, how much is missing here? Like, I think one of the first things I do is check for just like missing data points, just to get an idea of how complete the data set is. And then, look at when it starts, when it ends, see if that matches up what I need. Absolutely look at the data dictionary if there is one. And if there isn't, make sure that I understand what all the columns are saying, and they don't just have like enigmatic headings that don't really mean anything. And then start plotting out line charts. Usually that's usually what happens.
It's one thing that drives me wild is like when people remove the grid lines in an Excel spreadsheet. Like, what is even happening here? And Excel makes it so hard to add them back. Like, you got to use that little pencil to add all that, or make really dark lines. Anyway,
select all, remove formatting. That's what you want.
Yeah. That's I want it to look like the way I'm used to seeing it, and then people do that. They're, the way they like to see it with all the row banding and all this wild stuff. So
the row banding, my nightmare. I mean, I like it sometimes, but most of the time they add those colors. I'm like, why did you do that?
Yeah, it feels like something's wrong.
The people watching who work with data regularly are going to be going like, yes. And then the people watching who don't work with data regularly are like, why are they talking about like row banding? How is this important?
It just makes it, to me, it makes it harder to see. It's just like a distraction almost. Like, I need to be able to see the data. It makes it easier for me to see, I guess. How about you, Gabby? Like, what's the first thing you do when you open up a new data set?
Okay. I don't know. I remove the format. Full transparency, like half the time, I don't even have a data set. I have like 6 numbers, like literally 6 numbers. So it's really rare that I have like a big data set that I have to work with. Go ahead.
6 numbers is a data set. Like,
yes, but like it's not even worth putting in Excel. Like, I'm going to do things with it. I'm like, I don't like.
Because you can see it all, right? Like, it's all there.
Exactly. It happens though that I work with bigger data set, which in this case, I'm kind of like you. I format the way I like it. So I changed the font. I'm so sorry. I'm such a weirdo. I cannot stand whatever they use. So I usually swap to Helvetica because it makes my life easier. I like bold
true designer.
Yeah, I know. I know. Oh my God. Don't
I've got to have my spreadsheets in Helvetica, please.
Also, if you change it, also because I copy paste a lot of graph that I make in Excel and Illustrator as a base, and it doesn't work if you don't swap the font. So it's also why I tend to do that in advance. I bold the top, and usually like if there's a left, like a y axis, I like bold that and like freeze the rows because it allows me to go around easily. So all these things. And I tend to actually do what Duncan was talking about, which is a lot of the time I don't have definition in the data sets of what I'm looking at. So I do like to I actually make a new tab and I put the definitions there. Because usually it's going to go back and forth. I'm so sorry. My dog makes really weird noise. I feel really bad. I'm like, what's happening in the background? Usually what happens with project most of the time is they supposed to last 2 weeks and they'll last 3 months, and I'll go back and forth in the data set and I'll forget. So I can't trust my guts on like what it means. I don't want to have to look up for the 20th time what is this abbreviation. So if I need to, I'll make an extra tab straight in the Excel that like says what things are exactly, and the source, because sometimes I'm gonna have to go back to the source. Now I have new techniques, I use Notion for all that, but sometimes directly in Excel I put the source of like it came from here, so I can go back. If it came with content, explanatory content, I can go back and look at that to better understand where does that come from and why.
One thing that I do also is copy the tab. So like, and then name it original. So make sure like I can always go back to
raw data or something.
Raw data. Don't touch that one.
Every time I forget to do that, I'm like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? And whenever I do, I try to do this as much as I can, but Excel makes it hard. And I know there are tools out there that will keep track of the transformations that you're doing, because sometimes you're like, oh shoot, I need to go back. Like I did that wrong, or I, filtered this wrong or something. And you need to go back like 2 steps or something. So what I like to do is just whenever I do a main, I got like maybe I removed the duplicates or I broke up a column into 2 or something, I will copy that column and in the name of the the sheet, I would say like, okay, here's was the main transformation. Like I'll number it and be like, okay, main transformation I did was remove duplicates. And then now I'm working on this new one. Because the other day I forgot to do that. And then like I did a couple moves and then I resorted the data, but I accidentally didn't grab everything. And I pulled it into Tableau and I was charting. I was like, this isn't looking right. I'm like, and then I finally figured it out. And I'm like, oh no. Now I got to go back to like my previous tab and remember all the things that I did to get to this tab. So, I mean, save yourself a ton of heartache.
Yeah, all the coders are laughing here because, like, this is the one big benefit I think that a code-based process has is that you've got the entire history.
Yeah.
If you're working in R, if you're working in like a Python notebook or something like that, then all of that stuff is stored, especially if you're working in a notebook format. You can just like write yourself little notes like about why you're doing what you're doing and stuff like that. And I think that can be really, really helpful. Like even if you're working with something that doesn't need to be in code, like it's worth it just to keep track of like what you're doing.
Is this a shout out to Excel/Google Sheet? Like, please add like history because that would be really helpful. I have Dropbox, I can kind of like rewind, but I won't know what I've done exactly. So yeah, can you please add the function that allows us to like see the history changes and change the font and the colors because they did that first.
Now you're getting greedy. But I mean, if this is your job and you're a data analyst, there are tools out there that you use, like Knime. I don't know if you've heard of. Is it Knime? KNIME? I don't know if you've heard of it, but it almost looks like
I haven't heard about this at all. No.
It it almost looks like a spreadsheet when you open it up. But there's another tab that will it almost looks like a workflow type thing, and it's just showing kind of keeping tabs of the actions that you've done. Yeah, the process of cleaning it. And so other people can see how you cleaned it and check your process. And it's really brilliant. But it's like this weird gray area where, if you're not a data analyst and you're just doing a couple, cleaning things, checking things, like, do I really need to code or bust out the big data and the analysis tools. So there are a couple things that I do like that, like I said, with the tabs that are kind of like a middle ground.
Yeah. We've got a couple of comments in the chat. Let me bring some of them up. So Alfonso says, lol, the first thing I do is remove the grid lines. I think this is in response to you, Ali, saying you hate it when people remove the grid lines. It feels cleaner for me. Then I sometimes add dashed lines. That's subtle.
What? Like that. Oh my gosh. Alfonso.
And then we've got one from Gordon who says, I ran into Gabby's situation a couple of times. The clients just describe what the data might look like and then jump straight into designing data.
Oh, no. That's a whole nother thing. Okay. This is like a whole nother situation, Gordon. Will has one of those at the moment, so it's interesting. I don't know if you want to get into that about how you solve that, but that's a whole nother like problem of being asked to design Dataviz on like lowering IMSUB data.
Is this like they say, oh, we have financial data over the last 10 years and generally it goes down and we need it broken up by department? Is that kind of like what we're talking about?
Or like
and then they'll say something like can you start designing based on that and then we'll give you the final data like a week before launch or something like that. That is always a bad time.
Yeah, Gordon says yes. Yeah, I mean, and let's talk about why that's bad. I mean, one reason is the range of the data and like how the data is acting. A lot of your design decisions are based on that. So like something small where like what your axis range should be, or maybe little decisions you make. Like I've seen really cool examples of like a line chart and the data, the main point is at the end. So like people have moved the y-axis to be on the right side, which is a pretty nice design decision when it's useful. So like little things like that where you kind of need the data to know if you are designing it in the most effective way.
Yeah, range is a massive problem. I think that's the one I get asked, especially when you do things that are going to be interactive and like auto-populated, so the data is connected to the visual for web design. How many times I'm asked, especially for like there's going to be like 100 countries, And they're like, can you do something like imagine that there's a percentage here? And I'm like, I don't know. Does the percentage vary between 3 and 7%? Or is it between 3 and 100%?
Yeah.
Because then the visual solution is very different depending on that. And I found it really difficult to work around it. And I totally understand kind of where it comes from when they ask that, because they get excited about the design. But it makes it for extra iteration in the last week.
Yeah, it's like, well, what I had designed before doesn't even make sense because the changes are so small. My bubbles that I use you can't even tell. Yeah. What about missing data? I feel like this one seems really easy, but is actually kind of tricky because something's missing.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean it's
like,
0.
Right. So it definitely doesn't mean 0, and it could mean a lot of other things. It could mean no data was. They tried to collect data and they couldn't. It could mean they didn't try to collect data. It could mean they collected some data but decided to reject it for some other reason. There's like all kinds of reasons why a box might be empty or have a dash in it in a data sheet. And it is so important to know which one of those it is in a lot of cases.
Yeah. It does. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that's the methodology aspect. I think to me, if I see there's no methodology, I almost don't want to touch it, because I know there's going to be something missing, or something that's, even if it's an approximation, I want to understand if this number is an approximation or not. It matters in the way I visualize it and the story that comes with it. And if there's no way to find this, am I supposed to make an assumption that you just didn't collect, or you did, but it wasn't statistically relevant? And if you didn't, why didn't you? I think all of those needs to be answered before even opening the dataset. I mean, once you've noticed it's there.
Right. Yeah. A simple example is you have a line chart over some number of years and there was no data collected for 2020. It was blank. Does that mean it's 0? Like, what does that mean? Like we were talking about, but a lot of charting tools will just draw the line straight across the 0 and just show 2019 and then 2021. And then someone will be like, oh, the value for 2020 was 60. And actually it was 0. So you're giving your audience, your reader, they're allowing them to make assumptions based on how you are visualizing the data, which could be incorrect.
Just on a tangent for a second, how do you like to deal with missing data points in a visualization situation? I know that quite a lot depends on the context exactly, but do you like to do a dotted line? Do you like to have a gap in the line? Do you like to, what do you like to do?
Let's see, for a line chart, I do like to leave a blank in there. That's my preferred method. But if for some reason that just looks, that looks terrible.
Sometimes it can look really messy.
And it's confusing, I think, to people. Maybe a box there that's grayed out that says no data for 2020 or something, and then maybe make the line dashed when it's going through the box so people can, just for your attention's sake, look, this is like a ghost a ghost part of the line.
Yeah, it's tricky because you can't, you're trying to show the data that is there most of the time, right? Unless the point that you are making by doing this visualization is to show how much data is missing or something like that. That's a different situation. But if you are trying to show a story based on the data that is there, it's so distracting when there is something missing. It's so hard for people's eyes to not look at that and be
trend.
Where is this? And then, if you annotate it, you're drawing even more attention to it, and so
this chart is about missing 2020.
And so it's a surprisingly tricky problem to solve.
I mean, it gets into design hierarchy, right? When it comes to stories, I'm also, for the line chart, I'm into the use a very light gray, remove the line, just put the light gray, and then add a small dark gray annotation. And I think it comes to design hierarchy, to Duncan's point of being you have to put it there so it answers the question that anybody's going to see this and ask, why is there nothing? But it can't take away from the rest of the story. There's also other ways sometimes, if you do a bar chart and you're missing a year, because sometimes I use bar chart rather. Sometimes, if it's percentages, I'll have the the gray background for the 100, and then I'll have like the colorful bar for the actual percentage that's drafted displayed. And so I'll leave the gray bar being like there is a year here, but there's no color, and then I'll add like, instead of the bar, I'll add like missing data, like where the bar should be. There's many ways around it, but yeah, to Duncan's point, I think it comes down to design hierarchy of selecting like, is this the story or is the story something else, and then it needs to be discrete enough.
Yeah, it's really important. I think what you mentioned with the bar chart, a lot of times, the data's not there, so it wasn't even in your spreadsheet. But if it's something where people are expecting like either ordinal data or things where
what do you mean by ordinal data, Ali?
Or data has a specific order. So like if you're ordering small, medium, and large shirts, and then there's no medium, or like that's such a small data set, people would notice, but something like that.
Like years, like you have
years,
2 decades and you're missing one.
You wouldn't put them all in jumbled order, the years. But yeah, if it's 2020 is missing and you just completely skip it, people are usually look like at the beginning and the end, and they're not necessarily going to count one by one 2019, 2020, 2021. So they won't notice necessarily that 2020 was missing. So I think it is important to make sure you put that back in there.
And sometimes charting software will also not notice that it's missing. And like if it's treating your axis
most of the time
as categories rather than a linear sequence, then maybe your axis will just go 1967, 1969, 1970, and you won't notice, and that's also dangerous.
Yep.
Maybe it's something just saying that, but I know in Excel it's been a while since I haven't used that one, but I know there is a way to highlight discontinuity in data. Like you can be like, can you check that every single one is a year that like is one more year than the other, and I'll highlight where there's a gap. I don't remember what the function is or anything, but I know it exists, and that's something that also maybe is useful for people to know, that you can look that up and make sure that check that you're not missing something. Because even in Excel sheet, if you go from like 1980s to 2023, you might notice that 2005 is gone.
Yeah, that might be under data validation, probably something like that, maybe a rule.
Yeah, should we talk a little bit about data validation, because it is such a useful thing, and I think it's definitely something that I feel is a little bit of a secret weapon that most people don't know about and can be incredibly useful.
Yeah, a couple things that it can. I mean, the one thing that I use it mostly for is if there can only be a set of values in a column, like country or something. That's probably a big data set, a big number of values, but maybe something like small, medium, and large for t-shirts or something. I only want small, medium, and large, an S, M, and an L. Like I don't want anything else. So you can make it so, set up a rule where if it's anything outside that, then it's going to like highlight it in yellow, and then it'll allow you to see where your data is being inconsistent. Duncan, what else do you use it for?
I think it can be very, very helpful when you're working with dates and things like that. So I have a constant annoying problem around date formatting, because you crazy Americans
oh my god
months and then days and then years, and it's like, what?
And no one tells you which one it is. You kind of have to guess, because sometimes it's not even formatted as a date, it's just returned as text.
It's funny because I have the opposite frustration. It's like, why are you putting the day first? That's so confusing.
Because it's the smallest.
Everybody agrees that's the way to do it, though.
I know.
There is an international standard on this.
Not for us.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, I use this to try and figure out if this is a crazy American date column or a sane international date column. Because if it is kind of rejecting this, in the 13th month, then I know that that this is likely to be an American formatted date column. And so data validation could be very helpful with that.
Gabby, you haven't used data validation much, have you?
I use it sometimes. Again, I feel like I'm in the weed because I like very rarely have to manipulate data. So it's like once every couple months that I have to like heavily look at it and fill up blanks and have big data sets. So most of the time, honestly, I have this Notion page with like all my favorite tricks and tips that like the things like the data validation and the filling the blank, filling the blank with like the value above or noticing the blank. But I don't even know them by heart because I just have this reference being like, this is the thing I always need and I'm always looking for. And then every time I have a new one, I'm like, I'm going to add this here so that I don't have to look it for it next time. So I'm a newbie for that. I just don't even know what I use anymore. I just go there and I'm like, what did I use last time?
Yeah, sometimes you just have to run up against the issue and then Google it and be like, oh yeah, that's how I
yeah,
do it.
I think to me, it's about remembering the language. It's really a search problem. It's like I have to remember the language, like knowing that there's something called data validation that you can use, or that you can use conditional formatting, and that exists. Like if you know those names, you can. So to me, it's more like being able to reference what I'm trying to achieve in a way that Google understands, and then I can find a tutorial.
It's funny that you mentioned conditional formatting, because actually that is something that I do quite early on in a data set. Like if I just want to get a quick picture of what it looks like, I will do a conditional formatting where, smaller numbers are a lighter color and larger numbers are a darker color.
Same.
And it immediately gives me it's a visualization of the shape of the data.
It's like a heat map.
Yeah, it's super, super useful. And I definitely recommend people poke around with that. But I also have like a little, so I use Obsidian to keep all my notes and stuff like that. And I have a folder in there just called cookbooks. And I have like one of those for most of the platforms I use, with just like the little things that I need to do on a regular basis that I can never remember exactly how to do. I just like write it down. So like I have one so whenever I'm working with geodata, I use MapShaper, which is this amazing browser tool. It's super helpful, but it kind of has like a console in it. And if you want to do anything crazy, or not even that crazy complicated, you have to like work it through the console. And so I've just got this thing like merge polygons together, and it's like type this command in, or convert polygons to points, or classify a data field into classes, or join a CSV to a shapefile or something like that. And it's just really, really helpful because I can just paste that in and then just tweak it slightly to match whatever I'm doing, and then done.
Yeah, having a list of those things is really helpful. Let's see, data validation, conditional formatting. One of the biggest headaches that I have when I get data from someone is that they mix data types in one column. So like it's supposed to be a number, but then someone starts typing some words. And
God damn it, man. People are just I know.
But they don't know that, like, they're not doing anything with that data. They're not visualizing it. They're not bringing it into any software. So they're not running up against this problem. Like when you bring it into Tableau, it's going to start assuming what your data type is based on what's in that column. So it does a really bad job if it's that you bring in data and it's all messy. So I like to check to make sure that that's why I do the filter at the top. Like I'll just do that drop down on the column header and just give me a quick look at all the all the values that are in there. I'm seeing a bunch of text where I'm expecting a number. And
that is my second least favorite thing to find in a data set that I've just opened. Yeah. My number one least favorite thing to find in a data set that I've just opened is, let's say there's like 100 rows of data and 5 of the rows are highlighted in yellow. It's just like,
why?
Is this bad?
Yeah, exactly. What does this mean?
They don't go too crazy. It's just 5 yellow. I get them. There's like red, blue. Like somebody put the font into a color.
This is something that I drill into anyone that I work with. I'm like, color is not data. Like, make it a column.
Yeah, put it in a column.
Like, put it in categories. Like, if it's not done yet, have a little tick box column that says done, and then tick it when it's done. Like, I don't know, just a notes field if you absolutely have to. Though I kind of hate that as well, because it's just to like dump whatever you need to.
Yeah, you have to look around to find where that little top square is. Top triangle.
Yes. Color is my least favorite thing to have to deal with when I open a new data set.
No, make sure no information is encoded with color, because that's not going to help you when you try to visualize it.
And it completely vanishes if you export it as like a CSV file.
Oh, for sure.
Like
yeah.
that's a really important thing.
Yep. Yep, then it's gone. So you can do data validation, conditional formatting. Those are options in Excel. Another thing, an easy one is remove duplicates. So you can highlight a column and click remove duplicates, and then it'll ask you some questions, I think, and then it'll tell you how much was removed. So that's really helpful if you want to remove duplicates. And text to columns. Excel's it's a text to columns button, which is super helpful. So like if someone puts in, you have a column for name and it's Jane Smith, but you need first name in a column and last name in a column, just highlight that column and click text to column or text to columns.
So it's like a split function.
Yeah, it'll split it.
It's a split function. It's really awesome when you have first name, last name, and you need them separated, or email, or like things like that. You know, you have like several things by space. And it'll make a column for each different word separated by comma, space, whatever is the things that's separating words.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when I'm doing that so Google Sheets doesn't have that button, or at least I haven't found it if it does. But I just I use the split formula, and then that does the job just great.
Yeah, it's probably exactly the same thing. It's just a little bit less, like you don't have to do any formulas. It just walks you through it, a wizard kind of a thing. Which kind of reminds me of another big problem that I feel like is a pretty huge problem that a lot of people don't talk about, which is having unstacked data, or wide format versus long format, would we consider this dirty data? I don't know if it's considered dirty data, but you can't work with it. You can't visualize it when it's it's not in the right format.
Yeah, so this one is very case by case for me. There are definitely, like, to me, it's just kind of like, what does my tool need to visualize it the way that I want to visualize it? And some tools prefer tall or long or whatever you want to call it data, and some prefer wide data.
Can we explain what those are?
Yeah, let's explain what those are. Gabby, well volunteered.
No, you go. I think I can't even. Go ahead.
So I'll have a go, and then you folks can add stuff to it. With tall data, each observation is one row. One row is one data point, and if that data point has like multiple properties, then those are listed in columns, but it is strictly one data point per row.
That's wide, right? Because it gets wide. Well, because it gets wide because there's a lot of columns, right?
No. You've got one data point, so it might be
needs a column for every attribute.
It is wide because otherwise it's repeated. Like if you have 2019 and then you have like several A, B, C, it makes it wider. But if you have it stacked, it's 2019, 2019, 2019, and then A, B, C, D vertically, and so that make it tall. Is that correct?
That's the way I thought. Maybe we need to settle a bet. Settle the bet in the comments.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe I explained it not very well, but I definitely
you did explain it well, but I just don't know if the word is right, tall or long. Either way.
Yeah.
If that's the definition of one way, and then there's the other way where you could have multiple observations, but it's listed like an easy example.
Can we give an example? Yeah, I feel like an example might be helpful.
I'm just gonna see if I can find like
I'll give an example. You figure out.
I can give one. I can give an example. Let's say there's like Alice and Paul, and then there's like how many apple they buy every day or something like that. So Alice bought 1 apple on day 1, 3 apple on day 2, 5 apple on day 3. And so if you wide, usually you have Alice on the row on the left side, and then you'll have 1, 2, 3. 1 column for each new days of apple bought. But if it's stacked, you'll have on the left side Alice, 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 Alice. So she becomes a row for every time she has a data input. And then and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be vertical too, next to her name. So it looks like you have repeat stuff on the left side, if I were to describe that. And that's usually how most things like row graphs want the data to look like. But it's less easy to understand at first glance for human beings. Am I correct when I say that? Yes, I Duncan. I think
you
put that in.
So on the left-hand side in tall data, you have for each year, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, you have divisions which are repeated, but the sales figures, those are the data points, are unique. And so there's one row for each data point. Whereas on the right-hand side, your data points are arranged in a rectangle because you are cross-referencing the year and the division.
Yes, exactly.
So the right-hand side is a bit more human readable. The left-hand side is much more machine readable.
Exactly. Because what happens is that they can't do cross division in softwares. So the software wants to be told at year 14. He just reads one row. He doesn't do row plus colon intersection. He just reads the full row.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that is really nice is that if you've got tall data and you want to get wide data, it's really easy to do that in any spreadsheet program. What you want is called a pivot table. If you've never got into pivot tables, this is the magic. That's like,
this is my favorite tool ever.
Yeah.
But
so
you can't go the other way, right?
No, the other way is so painful. You can't.
It's so hard to. It's so hard to find something to do. Maybe we can talk about that in a second.
Yeah. So, I mean, my favorite trick to go the other way is I just load it into raw graphs, and raw graphs has a stack thing that you can do. And you can just be like, stack this on year. And then it will give you effectively tall data stacked per year.
Tableau does it too for you. And R, I know people use R a ton to shape data like that. I just wish it was easier. I think you can do it in Excel, but you might
I have a tutorial saved. There's a way to do it in Excel because it happens to me all the time. I think it uses filters and stuff like that.
It's way more complicated than you think it should be. Especially how easy pivot tables are, but you can't go from wide to long with a pivot table. So
so that's why I tend to like, if I'm dealing with a lot of data, I like to keep it long for that reason, because it's easy to go that way than it is the other way.
Yeah.
But whenever I'm like producing a table that's going to go into a chart, that usually involves making a pivot table from that raw data. And in the process of making the pivot table, you can take averages, you can take counts, you can filter, like you can do all that data manipulation magic that you need to do.
It is. I feel like that was the one big thing when I went from just working with data like as a side part of my analyst job to visualizing it. I just ran into so many times where it's like, why is the variable not showing up right in Tableau or in raw graphs or whatever? Like, why is it just showing me 20, like listing all the years, but it won't put that variable into the y-axis, or the x-axis. So that one concept really made my life so much easier once I learned what was going on, because you have to pay attention to which formats it's in, because your software is going to want it in a particular format.
Yeah, and I think that there are absolutely some visualization types where it requires any kind of a network diagram, you need to have like a from column and a to column.
Any Sankey.
And then the size.
The Sankey diagram, same problem. You have to have the to from. So you have to have a tall table.
Yep. Yeah, that maybe not necessarily dirty, but it is something you have to check for and you might have to fix before you visualize. So we won't be too mean.
I think it's like the number one issue though. Like
personally, it is.
I think it's like that.
Are people not talking about it a lot?
It's colors. Colors is the one
format
issue.
And colors.
And the date formatting.
The date format probably is number one. Number two is that thing. Because every time I try to make a Sankey or anything like that, when there's a from to to, I run into that issue of like tall versus wide. And I did for a long time. I didn't even know how to call it. I was like, how do I explain that I need to repeat this like y-axis at the top into like, again, when you don't know what to Google, you get stuck.
Yep. Yeah, that really.
So hopefully, if nothing else, we've given people some clues on what to Google. Yeah, I mean, if this is a situation that you are coming up against in your work and you're not really sure how to deal with this, but some of this sounds a bit familiar, there is tons of good advice out there. This show isn't really about like giving people tutorials on how to do that. Like, if you want to see that stuff, come and join the Elevate community, because we can share advice and tactics that way. But absolutely, there is good advice out there on YouTube, in blog
For
posts,
sure.
all over the internet.
So
You just
many.
need to know how to look for it.
Exactly. Yeah. You need to know what problem you could run into and what you need to Google in order to fix it. There are so many. I was just looking up YouTube tutorials this morning about something in Excel. So, and also, I've been using ChatGPT for like those tricky situations, like in Tableau, like what they call like a level of detail formula, a LOD, in order when there's the data's in a certain way, you have to use a LOD in order to whatever. And they're kind of tricky to figure out, but I just explained the situation into ChatGPT like with words, and then it gave me the exact formula to copy and paste. And you want to check it, but
yeah,
it's so easy.
It's pretty good at Google Sheets formulas and I guess Excel formulas as well.
Hmm.
And because it will not only tell you here's the command to copy and paste, it will also explain what it's doing.
Yeah,
most of the time, and that's really
and
really
you're
helpful.
learning.
I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Have we talked about dirty data enough? I think we covered a lot.
I think we've absolutely covered it. I mean, this was probably like a much more technical conversation perhaps than some of our episodes, but I think it's really, really useful to talk about for a few reasons. One of the reasons I think is that, when you are, there's nothing that makes you feel less qualified to do your job than getting a really messy spreadsheet and just being like, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this? And it doesn't mean that you are bad, like you're bad at your job. It just means that this data set needs some work. You have to put that work in.
And if you're the only Dataviz person on the team and there's like no other data people, no one else is telling you like, hey, don't just type 0 in when there's a missing data. Like there could be something else going on. You need to talk to people to understand that.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think the other thing, the other big reason why this is an important thing to talk about is because it is something that doesn't get discussed very much in a data visualization context, that you have to have good, clean data going into it in the first place. Like it's taken as read and everyone's like, oh yes, beautiful color palettes, or, make sure nice your design. Headline is your key takeaway and things like that. But
love to see some data set behind some art pieces, and it's kind of my big, I know we talked about price and competition, but I'm like, I feel like it should be like mandatory, like please provide the data set, because we would realize there's many mistakes that is happening. That is assumption, things missing that haven't been noted down as missing. Because I know I got a little better and cleaner, but back then when I was doing things, I remember being really messy with my data sets, and I'm sure there's mistake in some of the work I've produced in interpretation or in the visual, and I don't think you can't know that by just looking at the visual, because we good designers, right? Like that's what we do. So it does raise that idea of like, it is important. It's almost more important than Dataviz, because if it's wrong from the get-go and no one can check, what's the point? Like the visual is just the end of the project, but like everything that happens before is way more important, which also I think leads to this argument that if you have a client or boss that provides data and it's not cleaned, you are allowed to push back a little bit. You're allowed to say, can you clean that up for me? Because I cannot visualize this if it's not clean, or I'm going to take 3 weeks to do so, but I might induce mistake because this is not what I specialize in. I really think that we have a responsibility to do a little bit of cleaning. Like it happens, we all do it. But if it feels very much out of scope or out of skills and you get overwhelmed because of big data sets, you're allowed to say no. Like, like I have the wrong tool to work with.
Yeah, and you don't have to be rude about it. You can absolutely just say things like, I'm conscious of your budget, and I know it's going to take me a long time to understand what's going on here and work through it. If you have a data team, I wonder if you could ask them to just clean this up a little bit before I start working on it. That's totally non-confrontational, and a smart client will be like, yeah, you cost a lot of money, because you should be charging a lot of money. That's the other thing we keep telling you. You cost a lot of money, and we don't want to waste your design time cleaning up a data set.
And sometimes it's easy for them too. Like they exported the data in one way just because that's what they assumed you needed, but you needed another way. So you could just say, hey, do you mind re-exporting this? But I'm going to need this column, or I'm going to need it pivoted, or whatever. And it's an easy fix.
Yeah, quite often you can ask if you can just be connected with the person who supplied the data in the first place, and that can short circuit a lot of the back and forth as well.
Yep.
Yeah, shout out to all the people that make data sets for us and
Yes.
try their best
Yes.
to make it like we can
Clean it
actually
for
use
us.
it. For those who make who actually clean it up and then send us something, and not like something where you have your personal notes in there, and I'm like, oh my God.
I try and like anytime I get like a really nice clean data set, I will always mention how grateful I am about this.
It's like me and Figma files. When people send me Figma files, I'm like, oh my God, no, please don't. And then I open it, I'm like, oh, so clean. Oh my God, thank God.
Give that person a raise. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today talking about dirty data. I hope it was helpful. If you have any follow-up questions, join our Elevate Dataviz learning community at elevatedataviz.com. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.